Welcome to Passages Pulse, where we track the heartbeat of Israel and the Middle East from a Christian perspective. In a time of confusion, division, and misinformation, we're here to help you cut through the noise with truth, clarity, and conviction. Was Hitler really not that bad? Was Churchill the bad guy in the history books? Are we not being told the truth about the Holocaust? This is what we're going to be exploring today in the Passages Pulse. Welcome. My name is Sebastian. I'm one of your co-hosts, and today we have a very special guest. Today we have with us Olivia Layne. Hi, Olivia. How you doing?
Hey, I'm so good. So happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you. Really, we are so excited that you're going to be joining us for this special episode of the Passages Pulse. We released one before this one about the rise of anti-Semitism on the right. What's going on with conservatives becoming anti-Semitic? But part of that is Holocaust denial. So today we just want to zoom in into this topic of Holocaust denial. So please stay with us. But before we do that, let's get to know Olivia a little bit. Olivia, tell us, where are you based? What do you like to do with your time?
Hey, yeah, I'm here in Texas, right outside of Dallas. And yeah, currently, my life is so busy with work and everything that I feel like I don't have that much time for hobby. I have taken up running
Okay.
recently, I would say. I'm trying to get into running. I do have exercise-induced asthma, so that's been a little bit of a tricky situation, but that's been
Mm,
fun. Love reading, as you can see by the bookshelf behind me.
yeah.
And I'm currently finishing my master's in Holocaust and genocide studies, so that's been taking up a lot of my time as well.
Yeah. So that's why we have you here. Tell us about where you're doing that. What institution are you doing this?
So I'm doing it through Gratz College. They are actually a private Jewish college. I heard about them um, several years ago. Like I started this program well before October 7th. And yeah, I'm just wrapping up right now.
How many Christians are in your classes?
That's a good question. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
It's predominantly, I have predominantly Jewish what like fellow students. A lot of them are descendants of Holocaust
Mm.
survivors themselves, so they're doing a lot of work to figure out their own ancestry, and then a lot of the other ones are also there's like certification that you can do through this program to teach Holocaust education. So there are a lot of schools across the country now that are requiring that type of certification for high school students or high school teachers. So there's a lot of that as well.
Well, I'm so glad that you're doing that. It's quite a niche thing to do, right? Like most kids want to become lawyers and doctors. You decided along your path to this to go and learn more about Holocaust studies, about anti-Semitism. So let's get to that. How you got there. Let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us what kind of church you grew up, what kind of family you grew up, and then we'll stop at your college experience when you went to Israel, I assume. So tell us
Yeah,
what kind of upbringing you had.
yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in a Christian home, Protestant Christian. The churches that I went to growing up, I'd say were largely like Baptist leaning, but I never really grew up in an environment where it was like we go to this one denomination. So I think like the mentality was a little bit more non-denominational. Um, yeah, I would say too, I never explicitly grew up in like I would say like Zionistic home in the sense that that just was not really a main focus of conversation very frequently. I went to Israel for the first time at the age of 15, but that was with my grandparents' church and with my parents. And that trip was obviously amazing, but I was 15. I didn't really remember much. I wasn't really like absorbing that much. I did enjoy my time. But yeah, and then I just was really looking for I wanted to go to a Bible college. That was really important to me. And I really wanted to study theology. And so I looked around for colleges in my area. I really wanted to stay close to home. I'm an only child, so I have a really unique relationship with my parents, and I'm really thankful to be super close to them. So I really wanted to like stick close to family. So I ended up going to a small Baptist college in downtown Dallas called Criswell College.
Okay, and then you went to Israel again. in college? Okay.
Yes, yes. So this was actually during COVID. So
Hmm.
the group that I was going to go with was actually like part of a class. It was a requirement to go on like some type of overseas trip for the. I got my undergraduate degree in psychology, and so for every degree you had to go on like some type of trip like this. And so basically the way it worked was I was part of a class and we were learning about the history of Israel, and it was going to lead up to a trip, but obviously this being during COVID, none of us really knew how that was going to play out. My professor at the time was going to just take us on an individual trip. He spent, I want to say, at least over 10 years in Israel, met his wife there, had his kids there. So he was going to initially be like really in charge of the tour process. But then, because only certain groups were being allowed into Israel at the time, we needed to go with an official group. So we
Mm.
picked passages. And I'm so thankful. It's very clear that that was the way it was supposed to happen. And it was according to God's design, because that trip completely changed my life. So
Okay, so you went in 2020. Is that when you went, or 2021?
2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you went with passages, and I'm sure you went with other buses with other schools and stuff, right?
Honestly, I don't if we were, I don't
Okay.
remember that, because I think we were one of the first, like, buses that we were kind of guinea pigging,
Right.
like, going back to Israel post-COVID.
Wow. Yeah. And we talked about this last time with Dominique as well, that it was kind of empty. There was a lot of empty
Mhm.
streets, empty spaces. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was
So
really
tell me about your favorite place in Israel.
Ooh, that's such a hard question. My favorite place in Israel. Hmm. Um, I really like, um, Banyas. I think that's Caesarea Philippi. Um, it's where Jesus told Peter, "On this rock I'll build my church." I think that that location is super interesting because it really convicted me the first time I went, because, obviously, like when you go, like this Bible story that's like so integral to the Christian faith, and then you're seeing it in person for the first time, and it's like, wow, I can like come back home and read this in color. But like what stood out to me was this site was a had previously been a place of pagan worship, a place where there was child sacrifice, animal sacrifice, a lot of awful, unclean in Judaism, obviously, like things that would have been happening that would have been considered unclean for somebody who's an observant Jew. So the disciples going to this place obviously would have made them very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus saying to Peter in that moment, "On this rock I will build my church," signified to me that the gospel will call you to places that often make you uncomfortable and make you feel like a little bit uneasy, and that is not always a bad thing. I think in Christianity, especially my generation in the West, has had this mentality of like, oh, if it doesn't give you peace, then it's not for you. God must not have called you to it unless you have peace about it. And the reality is sometimes the things that God has called you to are actually going to make you feel the most uncomfortable. And so I think that that really changed the trajectory of my faith in a big way.
That is awesome. I love to hear that. That was great. Yeah, if y'all, most of you are listening, hi everybody. If you know Olivia, please drop it in the comments. Let her know that you love her, because I know a lot of you guys have been following her, and we'll talk about this in a second. But we all here, hopefully, Christians have read the Book of Mark, and in the Book of Mark, really highlights Jesus' power over darkness. He's casting out demons. He's submitting the nature, and this is an evangelistic purpose, that people see that the demons submit to him, that the nature submits to him, that he has power over death. He raises people from the dead, and people see that this is the Messiah because he's so powerful. And I love that Jesus did that there. Like no insecurity at all, just absolute power over darkness. Oh, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it. So this is such a good reminder for the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is the darkest thing that has happened in humanity as far as we know. And we'll get there in a second. But so after college, you came back, you went with passages. What was your first job out of college? Let me know how you end up working on passages.
Yeah, so I remember getting back. I was got back from my trip. At the time, I was working for an organization that did like HR compliance management. Not my life's passion. So I was like, it was like it was a well-paying job. It was a good job to have right out of college, but I knew that if I wanted to have a career, I wanted it to be towards something that was bigger than myself. And so when I got back from Passages, I remember I was jet lagged, obviously, and I woke up at like 3 a.m. and I was staring at my ceiling, and I remember just thinking to myself, like, I know I want to go back to Israel, and I know I want to help other Christians have the same experience that I did. And so, funnily enough, the place that I used to be working at actually was right across the street from the Passages office in Dallas. And so, um, I spent a lot of my time working this job that I was not super passionate about, literally staring at the building that
Wow.
I really
I didn't
wanted
know
to be.
this.
Yeah, yeah, and so it was a very, like, God very clearly was being like, "Be patient, like, I'll get you there." So
Wow.
I prayed about it, and I actually, it was definitely, like, all God's plan. I happened to be I have to share this story every time I talk
Do
about
it, do
how I
it.
ended up in Passages. So I got done with work, and I was actually just about to go on a trip to Ukraine to do humanitarian aid work in Ukraine, and I wanted to go get my nails done. And so I went to go get my nails done, and I sat down next to this very sweet woman, and I just complimented her nails. I was like, "Oh, I like love the color that you picked out," and we started having a conversation. And I don't know why, but I just asked her. I was like, "Do you happen to work at Passages?" And she was like, "Yeah, I do. How do you know that?" I was like, "I don't know. I just like kind of got a vibe, I guess. I don't know." And I said to her, very unashamedly, I was like, "Listen, if you ever are hiring, please, like, please, I
Nice.
would love to work for Passages." And so then she reached out to me a few months later and was like, "Hey, I don't know if you remember, we met at a nail salon, but we're hiring." And
Wow.
so that's kind of how I ended up working at Passages for about 2.5 years.
Yeah. So of course you don't work with for Passages anymore. Just wanted to let people know about that. But you did work for us. You worked helping us in fundraising, and then you switched over to the advocacy team, which is the team where I work. And we got to do some fun things. Like for instance, well, I wasn't there with you, but I know you helped us do an event at the University of Texas in Dallas. This
Mhm,
event called Brewing Solidarity. We'll tell you about that later. But then you came with me to do it at University of North Carolina, where we this was a few months ago. I think this was in November last year, where
mhm,
you flew in and we gave out coffee to highlight the hostages, and especially Keith Ziegler, who is from Chapel Hill in UNC,
mhm.
and we were the Christians and Jews giving out coffee to highlight the hostages, and you came and you helped us do that. So thank you so much for these are just two of the things that you did for advocacy. But then you are now working somewhere else. I think you have found a space for yourself in social media, and that's a very important place because that's where the anti-Israel hate is the loudest and it spreads easiest. So tell us about that, and then I have some quick fire questions for you. Tell us about your experience in social media, and let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, so, I mean, the journey with social media is really interesting because I initially, like, after October 7th, I was actually just having a conversation about this morning. I deleted social media
Hmm.
right after October 7th. I
Wow.
immediately saw the hatred on all social media platforms, and, I heard people frequently say that, like, "Oh, people were really supportive towards Israel right after October 7th," and then it wasn't until, like, after that that the tide shifted and then the antisemitism started, like, really getting bad. But I never saw that. Like, I remember being on my phone on October 7th and really seeing just the antisemitism. And as I'm sure you know, I went to there was a pro Hamas protest outside of the Holocaust Museum here in downtown Dallas on October 7th. And I went to that because I was like, this surely has to be some type of sick joke.
On that
And it
day, on
wasn't.
October
Yeah,
7th, on
on
Saturday.
that day, on
So
Saturday.
before Israel had done any response, their terrorists still killing Jewish people, and they went. Wow, tell me about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a really crazy experience because, I remember I don't even remember how I heard about it. I just remember I saw, like, a poster for it, and I was like, "That surely that's not right."
Hmm.
Because the only thing you could be going out and demonstrating for at that point is the celebration of the murder of Jews. And so I went to go witness it because I think, especially, at that point, I was earlier on in my Holocaust and Genocide Studies master's program. It was so odd to me to be reading about the Holocaust and then seeing the same mindset in my generation in real time in my own city. And so I went, and it was so odd, especially because they already had like big banners that they had gotten printed out, like industrial, like high quality banners.
Hmm. That
um
sounds
that
suspicious. How did it get it so
Yeah,
fast?
very very odd behavior. And I think in the moment I didn't process that. I didn't think about that until, like, weeks later. But I do remember standing there and just watching them protest and or celebrate the murder of Jews. And there was a father who was walking by with his young son. And his son said something like, what are they protesting for? What are they yelling about? And I just remember thinking to myself, like, how do you even begin to explain to such a young child the level of hatred and the complexity here, and the just like what kind of world this kid is now going to grow up in? And yeah, so I saw that not just in person, but then on my phone. And it really just got to me, especially as somebody who, I have friends in the IDF, and I, for days after October 7th, was unsure if some of them were alive or dead. And I felt like every anti Semitic video was a personal attack because it felt personal. And so I deleted social media, and I just booked a ticket to Israel and went and volunteered for a few weeks. And I, volunteered down south at on a farm, and did some volunteer work in Tel Aviv, and made sandwiches for soldiers, and worked on a tomato farm. And it was really therapeutic, I think, to be able to do something with my hands and actually feel productive rather than just scrolling and feeling very helpless to do anything about it. And then I got home, and I think because I had assumed that, Gen Z has a really short attention span, I assumed that, give it a few weeks, maybe max a few months, and they'll move on to the next conflict halfway across the world that they also have no personal connection to. And then I'll be free to get back on social media, and I won't see any of this anymore. And clearly, I was very wrong. And so I got back on social media, and it was still all there. And I think the moment that I, like, really got involved with it was unintentional. Was when the All Eyes on Rafa infographic was, going around. And this was, of course, I can't remember if it was right before or after the Israeli hostages had been executed in Gaza. And I just posted a video, honestly, mostly because I know that I have a few people in my own circle who lean pro-Palestinian, which I hate using that word anymore. They're pro-Hamas, because I am pro-Palestinian. They weren't listening to me anymore. We tried to have some personal conversations, and they had clearly not been open to it. And I knew that if I posted something on TikTok, they would at least see that. So I posted a video, just basically venting. And I was really surprised by how many people reached out and said, thank you for speaking up as somebody who's not Jewish. And when I found that out, I thought to myself, I've been off social media for months at this point, but my Jewish friends haven't. And they're seeing all of this, and how lonely has a place like social media become for them. And how awful is it that there are so few Christians who are really, like, making an effort to speak up about this kind of thing. So I just kept posting. And yeah, there's still moments where it angers me, and I get the hate comments and the death threats and all of that stuff. But I think it's important, especially when you're getting pushback. It usually is a sign that you're heading in the right direction. So
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for doing that, and I think it's very important, especially for the youngest generation who don't really know anything, who never saw 9/11,
mhm.
who don't understand enough. And we're gonna talk about that today as well. So, where can people find you?
So my Instagram is at live lane underscore LIVLAYNE. And then my TikTok, which I'm kind of potentially getting rid of TikTok. I really think it's a whole propaganda machine. That's another topic.
Right.
Um, but it's Live, Laugh, Love Israel,
That's a great one.
LSD. So
You should
yeah,
probably sell
and
that, put it up for auction. It's a great handle.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have and if you see my Instagram, I also have a podcast, and all of that's like linked in my bio. So if you're trying to find me anywhere else, it's all there too.
Yeah, please do. And so, first of all, be in prayer for Olivia for her safety. And I'm sure you take a lot of precautions to make sure that you protect your personal identity from your online presence. And I think this is great. It reminds me, you and I went to the November, many of us as passengers went with more than 700 passengers alum to DC to march in DC. And we were just wearing these t shirts that said Christians stand with Israel. And the Jewish people would see that and they will smile and give us a hug and want to take pictures with us because, like you said, they think that nobody cares. They turn on the news and everybody's hating on them. They go to social media, everybody's hating on them. They go around their cities and people are ripping out posters. People are protesting, shutting down highways to protest, and they might feel really alone. But as the Lord tells the prophet in the Old Testament, comfort my people, and we can do at least that. We can at least comfort His people and tell them that they're not alone, that we think about them. So thank you for doing that. Before we move on to the topic of today, let me ask you some quick fire questions. Who's your Israel Zionist hero? Israel Jewish Zionist hero. Who's your hero?
Ooh, are we talking like modern or
Any,
historical? Does it matter?
anytime.
Ooh, oh man, that's such a good question.
To listeners and viewers, comment in the comments. Let us know who is your hero.
Yeah, I mean, ooh,
Maybe we can come back to it if you want.
yeah, yeah. Let me think. Let me think about it.
Okay.
That's such a big question. Let me think about it for a little
Next one.
bit.
What is it? You say you read some books. So, what is one book that people, besides the Bible, that people must read to understand Israel?
Ooh, I'd say if I can't pick one, so I'll do two. Israel by Noah Tishby.
Okay. All
Um,
right. It's a newer one. It's like 2 years old,
yeah,
maybe
it's a
one.
newer one. I really like it because it's easy. It's easy to read, first of all, but also it goes through like a lot of the common misconceptions about Israel that I think in like a really brief and very personal way because she's sharing her own story as well, and I think that that's really important.
Yeah.
Um, and then another one is probably Israel by Daniel Gordis is also a really
It's
good
a really
overview
good
of
one.
the history of Israel. I actually found out about that book through passages anyways, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's
We
a
like to
really,
give it
really
out a lot. So, it's a little
yeah.
bigger book and it's so great. It's full of really good stuff in there. Okay. What is your Starbucks order?
Ooh, I like an iced white mocha with sweet cream cold foam.
Ooh, sounds
What's
sounds
yours?
great. I just like 4 shots of espresso over ice with salted caramel cold foam. I know 4 shots. I'm
Four
from Colombia,
shots?
people. Okay, so
You probably don't even go to Starbucks then. You probably have your
no,
own like special.
I do like. I mean, when I'm traveling for work, I do like. I have a whole operation going on in my house. But when I travel, 4 shots of espresso with cold foam, salted caramel, it's the best. All
Wow,
right.
okay.
Last question. Well, actually, I have two questions, but I'm going to ask you the one right now, and I'll ask you the last one at the very end when we are done. So, what keeps you up at night regarding Israel? Don't tell us your personal problems. What keeps you up at night?
Can you imagine I just go into that?
Don't drama dump right here. What keeps you up at night regarding Israel, anti-Semitism?
Um, I'd say especially within the last few weeks, given the attack in DC and then this, attack in
Yeah.
Colorado just a few days ago, um, I think the thing that's been keeping me up most late at night is that we're seeing this movement, this progression where like this rhetoric that, obviously like there's been violence against the Jewish community since early on post October 7th, but now we're seeing it become normalized in a way that is very clearly much more extreme and happening at a much faster rate. And I think that the thing that's keeping me up at night is the fact that like people that are in our space, and our Jewish friends, like they see this very clearly. But there are people, especially within the Christian community who don't see this. And for me, like I'm just one voice, like I'm just one person. I really think the only reason why I think I've gained a larger following is because, unfortunately, like, there are not many Christians who are willing to take a stand and to face the backlash that comes with standing with Israel and the Jewish people. And, like, if individual Christians would just realize how much their individual voice matters and how much change they could initiate if they just spoke up about these issues just on their own, I think that what we've been seeing happening the last few weeks, I think we could potentially keep that from happening in the future. But my fear is that, it's going to take something, hopefully not on the same scale, but something similar to 9/11 in order for individual Christians to realize how much their voice matters in this way. And I think that that's been what's keeping me up at night. I really hope it doesn't ever come to that, but I think that that's unfortunately where we might be headed.
That's great. Yeah, good point. And we would encourage people to, you can make a difference. You can do something about this. And first of all, it starts with educating yourself. If you have a few friends at church, you don't need to go on social media and try and, get tens of thousands of followers like Olivia. Although if you want to do that, that'll be great. But because it does have an impact. But grab three friends, go to the local Jewish museum, learn more about the Holocaust. Take a Saturday to go read a book, learn, go watch a movie. There are many films that you can watch about this. But well, thank you, Olivia, for all that. We're so glad. We wanted to get to know you in this first episode that you're with us, because you'll be with us a lot, we hope. So
Yes.
let's talk today about the Holocaust denial then. And keep in mind
Mhm.
the other question I asked you, you Israel hero. We can talk about it at the end. I'll revisit that
Yes.
question. So
Great.
Holocaust denial usually takes two forms. People
Mhm.
start denying the facts, the historical facts that we have. Another part of it is trying to justify what happened. Well, it did happen, but there is a bigger picture. Let me tell you why the Jews deserve or
Mhm.
like why they had it coming. So give us some examples of what this looks like. What does Holocaust denial look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the interesting thing about Holocaust denial and about anti-Semitism in general, and you'll hear this from any scholar that talks about anti-Semitism or the Holocaust, is that obviously anti-Semitism is a virus that mutates over time, so it doesn't always take exactly the same form. And so I think something interesting that we're seeing right now, with social media especially, is that these forms of anti-Semitism, of Holocaust distortion, of Holocaust denial, they're taking very unique forms that, in order to prevent themselves from being censored by these larger platforms, right? So you'll hear, kicked out of 109 countries, or, if I'm kicked out of 109 restaurants, does that mean that the restaurant was prejudiced against me? Obviously, alluding to the Jews historically being kicked out of places and
Hmm.
mass expelled from places, right? Victim blaming, essentially, is what that is. So there's a lot of different forms of Holocaust denial. Obviously, the main ones are going to be like straight up just denial of well verified facts, like claiming gas chambers never existed, using wrong numbers of Jewish victims, saying, it wasn't actually 6 million. It was more like, I think the number that people usually point to is like 100,000 ish.
Wow.
Um, or, saying something like, Hitler never actually ordered the extermination of the Jewish people. You'll hear, distortion and minimization is another really big one, saying that, the Holocaust was not uniquely evil, that it was just, another, wartime tragedy, or trying to like equate it to other historical events. Another one is, just outright glorification or justification. This often comes from like neo Nazis, members of the far right, white supremacists, will openly celebrate Hitler and the Nazi regime. And, oftentimes that comes with the association that you're talking about, which is, the inversion of like bringing it on themselves, which is obviously a deeply anti-Semitic and historical anti-Semitic trope. And then I'd say the last major one is inversion, which we also just talked about, which is like, comparing, and this is a big one that you'll see right now just because of everything going on with the
Yeah.
war, but it's comparing the Jews in Israel and globally to the Nazis. Not in the sense that they're, just critiquing the policy of the Israeli government, which obviously you are allowed to have opinions about the Israeli government. Just ask any Israeli ever,
Yeah.
and it's sure they'll tell you theirs. But it's to morally equate the victims of a genocide with their murderers. And that is obviously not a critique. That is just a blood libel. So,
So wait, I assume that these people, we could break it down into demographics, but I assume most of these people went to school somewhere. If you went to school in America, you probably learn about this. I came here when I was in 10th grade, and in my ethnic studies class, we watch
mhm.
movies or like films about the Holocaust. We were taught about it in history class as well. These people went to school. So what's happening? How are they denying this thing that they were taught in school?
Yeah, that's actually really, I think about this a lot because for me personally, I was homeschooled.
Okay.
So I was never
Shout
in the
out to
like
all the
public.
homeschoolers. Let us know
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
want.
It's amazing. Yeah. Um, yeah, so I mean, I think from what I'm seeing, so it's important to note too that like 29 states have laws requiring some type of Holocaust education.
Right.
The other 21 don't.
Hmm.
They may encourage it on their own time, but it's not something that's required for them in the education system. And even then, when Holocaust education is required in the public school system and private school system, it's not something that is necessarily done thoroughly. I don't know, like this again is such a wide variety amongst the country, but from what I know, it can range anywhere from you just have like one day that's dedicated to Holocaust education
Yeah.
to maybe a couple days to, I've heard some people even say there's only been a few hours dedicated to learning about the
Hmm.
Holocaust. And so actually I want to bring up some statistics too, because as I've thought about this a lot, there was a study done that was, I think, the first study that was done for all 50 states in regards to like Holocaust education and anti-Semitism amongst American millennials and Gen Z. And this was done in 2020, by the way. So I'd be curious to know like how much worse it's gotten since then. But according to this study, nationally, 48% of US millennials and Gen Z could not name a single one of the more 40,000 concentration camps or ghettos established during World War II.
Wow.
That's
Not
crazy.
a single
So
one.
then another one said, they said, in perhaps one of the most disturbing revelations of this survey, 11% of US millennial and Gen Z respondents believe that Jews caused the
Wow.
Holocaust. Now, I'd be so curious to know, since this study was done in 2020, how much worse those statistics are
Yeah.
right now, because we are seeing a generational decline in support of Israel and an increase in anti Semitism. So obviously, like those are really, really awful statistics. But I think the main thing is that Holocaust education is important, absolutely, and in my opinion, it should be required in all 50 states. But the reality is, it's not just Holocaust education that needs to be studied; it's actually the build up to the Holocaust that
Yes.
really should be studied. So that doesn't just mean, the rhetoric that led up to the Holocaust, but in a lot of ways, it also means understanding the history of Christian anti Semitism, the complicity of the church, and how theology was historically twisted to justify that kind of hatred. And I think understanding that context will help. Because I don't see how you can study that kind of thing and not see a comparison to what we're seeing right now, the same rhetoric, the same types of phrases that are being used in the streets and on college campuses everywhere. And so I think that that's really something big on my heart, is that if you're going to study the Holocaust, that's great, but you really need to be studying the Holocaust in context.
This is a great point. As you know, in Passages, we have a weekender in DC where we take high schoolers, college students to go through the Museum of the Holocaust and the Museum of the Bible, and we tour the other museums, the monuments. And I like the Museum of the Holocaust Memorial in Washington D.C. because it starts with how the Nazis got to power so it's like 4 floors. So you start first with how these people came to power first. So you start understanding that first, and then you start seeing the progression that led them
Mhm,
to the final solution. But
mhm,
hold on, part of this, what you are talking about, is historical revisionism, right?
mhm,
People who are trying to, so people went to school, people probably went to college, and then they started watching YouTube videos and they started falling down this path of historical revisionism. It seems like there is a
mhm,
connection between historical revisionism, and you cited some data. I also brought some data. Turns out that I was really stunned by this 2022 survey. We might be looking at the same survey, that only 19% of people or young people in England view Churchill positively. So people between
Wow.
18 years and 24 years, they did a survey by an organization called Policy Exchange. Um, the rest of the age groups saw Churchill positively in 47%. So 47% of people, which is still super low, saw Churchill as a positive figure. But young people, only 19% of them thought that Churchill was a good guy. And why? Because they're saying that he was a colonialist, that he was a racist. They say the same about Lincoln sometimes and other people like that. So, what does that tell you about historical revisionism? Tell me about that. Why is this happening?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably a conglomeration of like a lot of different issues in society, um, as to why like this revisionism is so prevalent right now. I think a lot of it comes from this like historically this like oppressor oppressed narrative that we have going on in the education system right now. And again, this is just, my personal opinion. I think it's a lot more than this, but I think this is one of the main issues is that Americans are told to feel this sort of like self-flagellation, this like immense guilt over our own history. Now, obviously, America is not a perfect country. We have done awful, horrific things in our past. But because of this, we have a tendency to view everything around the world, at least my generation, through an American historical lens, which is in the American historical perspective, a oppressor oppressed, a white colored narrative.
A
So
Marxist view of history. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So, that includes, seeing everything going on in Israel as through an oppressor oppressed lens, through a, colonizer and colonized perspective. And I think that has just come from a, critical theory, really critical theory heavy education system, as well as just this like collective guilt that we've been told to feel over our history.
But even in those lenses, so I talked in one of these episodes that I came to this country and I was a fairly privileged person in my country. We flee because of political persecution. My parents got political asylum here, but I never saw myself as a victim until I went to college. In college,
Mhm.
I was told that I was a victim of colonialism, that the Spanish were evil, that I need to hate white people, and black people are told the same thing. And one of the big trends in studying the horror of slavery that black people went through in this country obviously tells black people, you're a victim, and of course, the slaves were black, brown people, Hispanic people. You're a victim. Maybe Asian people get told the same. So all the minorities are told you're a victim, and there's a lot of solidarity with minorities. But now we come to the Jews. The Jews were
Yeah.
slaughtered in the Holocaust. Why is there not equal like similar sympathy towards Jewish people? Why do Jewish people become the villain in the story when they were the actual victims?
Yeah, it's a really interesting. Well, I so couple things. One is I think that, especially within college campuses right now, there's a whole issue of Qatari money and all of these funds being funneled into our, public education system, which I think obviously needs to be investigated way further, because I think that's a huge problem. But as far as like, Jews, being the put as the oppressor when they are the oppressed, I think there's so many reasons. Like there could be a whole podcast episode just dedicated to this, but I mean, historically, the Jewish people have been called the canary in the coal mine for the slow descent of any, modern civilization. And I think that that's really clear here because when a society begins to lose faith in its own moral fabric and its own ability to reason and have justice and, Western democratic values, it then needs a scapegoat. And the Jewish people, I mean, historically, it's not just, an American specific thing. This is just a historical truth that the Jewish people have historically been that scapegoat. They are the capitalists to the socialists and vice versa. They are historically, you look throughout any time in history anywhere throughout the world when the Jewish people are persecuted, it is because they are blamed for the moral failings, the perceived moral failings within a society. So I think that that's really honestly what's happening here, because if you look at the narrative is that the Jewish people are white colonial oppressors. And what do young Americans view themselves as? They view themselves as white colonial oppressors. And so how do they void themselves of that feeling of collective guilt? Well, they can void themselves of it if they just project that guilt onto another people group and then persecute that people group and make them held responsible for their perceived guilt.
That's perfect. Yeah, and I've heard Douglas Murray has been making this analysis in his latest book. And we said it in another episode. If you guys want to receive a copy of that book, let us know in the comments. We'll be happy to send you one. It's called Democracies and Death Cults, and that's exactly
Mhm.
right. That because people are privileged, they don't have any other way to project their own guilt. They do it on the Jewish people. Another piece of
Mhm.
data from this survey that I saw. This one is done by YouGov, an organization based in the UK. They say that 23% of United States adults describe Hitler as a good person, or equally a good and a bad person, or a bad person who did some good things. So he was a bad guy who did some good things, and 11% believe that some of his ideas were right. So this is super scary, because over the weekend, I don't remember if it was a podcast or an article that I read about a group of people who live in these apartments where the Nazis used to live near Berlin, near the lake, where they made the decision to the final solution. And these
Mhm.
people are reflecting on the fact that they live in this building where the Nazis, like you, you alluded to this earlier, they did make a decision. The
Yeah, the Wannsee Conference, yeah.
Exactly, thank you, to
Mhm.
exterminate the Jews. So I think the problem here is the double standard. We've been talking in this
Mhm.
podcast that the definition of anti-Semitism is dehumanization, demonization, and double standards. And
Mhm.
once again, all the other victims of horrors throughout history are treated as such, but the Jewish people, there's a double standard. Oh no, it turns out that they were the bad ones. Let me tell you why. So this is super scary. Why is this dangerous? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, yeah, viewing Hitler is the good. I actually remember the first time that I ever heard like who Hitler was. I don't know why this is like a core memory for me. I remember being in the kitchen of my old house. I was super young, and I asked my mom. She was like sitting at her desk doing work, and I asked her, "Who is Hitler?" Because I don't know how I heard. I guess I must have had like some type of history book that I was learning, and I asked, "Who is Hitler?" And she said, I will never forget the look on her face because, as a parent, you're like, how do I describe, how do I even begin to describe such profound depths of evil to my young child? And I will never forget her answer was, the only person, like Satan, the only person who could be on level with, maybe a little bit better than Satan. Like that is the
Wow.
like you think of Satan and you think of the most evil, evil, evil.
Yes.
That is, you should also be thinking about Hitler the same way. And that was the first exposure that I ever had to any talk of World War II, the Holocaust, anything like that. That was the first thing that my mother said, because that is obviously
Yeah.
incredibly accurate. And I think that when it comes to talking about, like, the revisionist history, is Hitler really the good guy? I think that, again, that stems from this tendency for people in the West to have what I did not come up with this term. I think maybe Douglas Murray did. I don't know who did, but like suicidal empathy, where we have this need to view people who would gladly kill us because of whether our faith, whatever the case may be. We have this need to view them through a very sympathetic lens. And, I think, like, when it comes to talking about why, Holocaust denial is so dangerous, why anti-Semitism is so dangerous, it gets back to the most obvious point, which is that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I think, we say never again, and that's something that, became really popular to say after October 7th as well. But the reality is, like, we can never reach a point where we are so complicit to think that something like this could not happen again. We always have to be analyzing things from the perspective of, if humanity could have gotten to that point at one point in time, we could get there again. And so, it becomes dangerous because then we are, distorting history, and we're inviting that sort of repetition.
Yeah, I wasn't planning on going here with this our roadmap for today, but let's go there real quick. I'm thinking about that poll that says that young people in England, especially, have a bad view of Churchill. And I wonder what the ethnic makeup of that young demographic is. And I said it as an immigrant myself. You know, we just talked about the problem of US education. Maybe not enough people are being educated about the Holocaust in our United States system. But imagine other countries. I grew up in Colombia until ninth grade. I never heard of the Holocaust. Never heard of the.
Mhm.
I think my parents probably watched Schindler's List at some point. I didn't
Mhm.
pay attention when I was 12 years old. But anyways, let's go there for a little bit because
Yeah.
maybe you can tell two questions. One, where was Holocaust denial born? Who maybe what maybe were who started promoting these ideas? And I generally don't know. And second, what does Holocaust denial looks like in other parts of the world? And people from those parts of the world are coming to the West, are coming to Europe, are coming to the United States, and they're bringing these ideas with them. Because you had your mom, who had the moral clarity to tell you who Hitler was. Other
Mhm.
kids are not having parents with that moral clarity because their parents didn't have it either. So let's go there for a second.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know if I could pinpoint, where exactly, Holocaust distortion and denial came from per se. I will say though, I think we hear about, the Soviet secret police publishing documents like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in 1901, and that being, the alleged, obviously, these documents have proven to be falsified, but the alleged meeting notes between members of the Jewish community plotting global domination, right? So there have always been these conspiracy theories that we've seen that have painted Jews as the oppressor, as secretly controlling and pulling strings in the background. The common anti-Semitic tropes now are obviously Jews control the banks, they control the media. There's even ones that say they control the pornography industry, they control the weather. Like anything you can think of, like the Jews are probably behind it. Like that kind of thinking, I think, just naturally over time spawns into, when left unchecked, and obviously when people refuse to sort of point out the inherently flawed logic behind those types of conspiracy theories, it leads to Holocaust distortion and denial. And then when you obviously have, people who historically, I mean, especially within the conservative movement right now, I mean, obviously this happens on the left as well, but as somebody who's on the right, like, it concerns me even more when you have figures like, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, perpetuating these tropes, but doing it under the guise of like they're just asking questions. But the only reason you ask a question is to actually get an answer. So they're not actually just asking questions, because if they actually cared about the question they were asking, they would provide credible evidence to provide an answer to said question. That's not what they're doing. They're just perpetuating anti Semitic tropes and engaging in Holocaust denial. Whereas, like, Tucker Carlson had, I don't even remember his name, some historian who, he was the one who said, Churchill
Yeah.
Churchill's actually the enemy. Hitler wasn't that bad of a guy. And, Tucker to this day will say that he's never said anything anti Semitic, which, I can't confirm or deny whether or not that's inherently true. But that's not the point. The point is he platforms people who are
Right.
anti Semitic and who engage in these kinds of things. So I think that is becoming a growing problem, especially as my generation sorts to like look away from, mainstream media platforms more toward these like podcast personalities.
Yeah. Another. So you mentioned the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is it was Russian propaganda, anti-Semitic propaganda, and that book is very famous, very popular, or had been in Arab countries. And
Mm-hmm.
for instance, this is I've been waiting to the opportunity to say this. So here I am. Do you guys know that Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, aka Abu Mazen, as he is called, he got a PhD. And where did he get it? He got it in Russia. He got it in the Soviet Union in the 1980s, before the Soviet Union fell. And what was his PhD on? It was on the connection of Zionism and Nazism. And his
Mm-hmm.
thesis was that the Jews collaborated with the Nazis to do the Holocaust so that they could come to the land of Israel and create a Zionist state. This is what the president of the Palestinian Authority believes. This is what he got his PhD on. And this is the guy with whom Israel has to make peace.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just gonna
Yeah,
drop
it's a
that.
great point too. And also, yeah, it's like such a good point to bring up, because I don't think people understand, um, people my age especially understand the ties that Islamic Jihad and Nazism actually have, especially when it comes to talking about the Middle East. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is still one of the most widely published documents in the Middle East, the most widely disseminated, and so is Mein Kampf. Hitler's book. And
Very
so,
popular.
I mean, you hear, and I'm sure you've seen this too, you hear about soldiers in the IDF going into homes in Gaza and finding copies of Mein Kampf, finding
Wow.
statues and figurines of Hitler. And,
Wow.
it's become so deeply embedded into Islamic thinking, radical Islamic thinking, especially in the Middle East, that it's an extreme problem. And I actually, yeah, if I get my PhD, I think I would write it on the ties between Islamic Jihad and Nazism.
Please do. That'll be super powerful. All right, as we wind down towards the end of our podcast, I want to ask you about Holocaust education itself. So you're getting a PhD in, sorry, you're getting a master's in this, and you talked about how it needs to improve, it needs to work better. Is there anything that you believe needs greater focus in Holocaust education?
Hmm, good question. I'd say, obviously the lead up to the Holocaust, and learning about the Holocaust in its context, because I think that so many people seem to like start right at the camps and right out the mass executions, and skip over the fact that this was something that had really been spiraling in this direction for hundreds of years before the Holocaust ever happened. And I think honestly, like, so much of this has shown me, and maybe I'm just biased because I'm homeschooled, but so much of this has shown me that parents really need to like step up when it comes to educating their children about these kinds of things. Really like understanding the role that parents play in helping their children. Like, I think back about my mom saying that about Hitler, and that being my first sort of exposure to this kind of evil. And I wonder what it would have, like, that is a, like, I don't remember much of my childhood. I just have a bad memory, but that memory stands out to me so much. And, I wonder what it would have been like if my mom, had just like tiptoed around that, or, not wanted to talk about something so evil and dark with me when I was just a curious kid asking questions. And I think, the more that parents can lean into that and really take responsibility for giving their kid a well-rounded education when it comes to this kind of stuff is important. But I don't know. I think, a lot of people really need to I think, and I've said this a couple times now, understanding the importance of your individual voice, and that you actually can initiate change. You as an individual person, like, you can do this. Like, going to your local school education system and petitioning them for greater Holocaust education resources. If your school doesn't mandate Holocaust education, figuring out a way to like rally people together to make that happen. Those kinds of things that happen on like a local state government level, that I think we could really all benefit from. And, just the individual stuff of like calling out anti Semitism and Holocaust distortion when you see it on an individual level, I think is also really, really important.
Yeah, and for the record, you have been to some of these concentration camps, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I visited Auschwitz when I was in Ukraine doing humanitarian aid work. I went and for like a day and visited.
So the denial that the gas chambers didn't exist, you can go and just see that today. Anybody can go.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think that's another important thing as well. And I'd say this not even just for the concentration camps, and going to these places and actually seeing it with your own eyes, because then you become a witness yourself, and you have a certain amount of not just obligation, but also reliability as a source when you've seen it yourself. But also, even just going to Israel. Like, I don't work at Passages anymore, but I talk about it all the time. And I, highly recommend anybody that I know that's in college. I'm like, please go, because, there are not many Christian companies, Christian nonprofits that take Christian college students to Israel the way Passages does, providing a multitude of different perspectives and providing an encounter with modern Israel and ancient Israel. There are not many other companies that do that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's really important to make sure that you're also a witness to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, listeners, if you want to go to Israel with us, we are going to be going to Israel this winter again. So you can go to our website, passagesisrael.com or .org. I always get that wrong. And you can go on the top right. There's a thing that says travel with us. It's passagesisrael.org. And you can travel with us to Israel for less than $1,000. That's how much it costs to go to Israel with us. And it will not only enrich your spiritual life, but it will help you understand better. So anybody can go visit this concentration camps. You can probably go to Google Earth and find these places and look at the satellite images of these gas chambers and these concentration camps. But I wanted to talk. So our listeners are mostly Christian. Let's talk about what role Christians play here, because
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw in a spiritual thing here. It is very interesting that the hatred of the Jewish people is the oldest hatred in the world, and it always finds a way to rear its head. Like I've been talking a lot about this in many of our podcasts. How even the Black Plague happened, you blame the Jews. The Mongols happened, they blamed the Jews. Uh, COVID happened, they were blaming the Jews because I think the head of Pfizer will happen to be a Jewish guy or something like this, right? So they always find a way to blame the Jews, and I think it's because part of this is, the Jewish, the first prophecy of the Bible is in Genesis 3:15, which says that I will put enmity between your seed and her seed, is talking to the evil one, and the seed of the woman is where Messiah would come from. So the enemy has a very a high interest in trying to destroy the seed of the woman, trying to destroy the seed of the people of Israel, the Semitic line, if you will. And I think this is why the Egyptians wanted to kill the Jews. This is why Herod wanted to kill Jews. This is why Persian Haman, who wanted to kill Jews.
Boo.
Um, Tell us what, like, give us a spiritual perspective of this Jew hatred from history.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you laid it out perfectly. There absolutely is like a spiritual element to it. And I think also, like, it's undeniable when, as somebody who's like now in like newly in this like social media space, it's really, because I've had people tell me that all the time, like, oh, it's a spiritual battle. So much of it is a spiritual battle. And I guess my tendency was to just not try to over spiritualize things. So I never really engaged with that a whole lot. And then when I got into the social media stuff, I couldn't help but like the way people are so incredibly spiritually blind.
Hmm.
Like, I've engaged in some, debates with people who were pro Hamas, who, because I am the way that I am, I did competitive speech and debate for 4 years in high school.
Hmm.
I am of the like, my mindset is always, well, if you lay out the facts and if you lay out, here's the affirmative argument, here's the negative argument, here's the evidence for both, you can make up your mind. And in my opinion, and just truthfully, Israel is the good moral actor in the region and does everything they can to minimize civilian casualties and operate in urban combat and all the things. And in my opinion, it's like, okay, well, if you lay all of this out, shouldn't that make somebody, not even necessarily pro Israel, but just against anti-Semitism? And the reality is I very quickly realized that that is not the case, because there are some people who truly lean on their anti-Semitism as a moral crutch. Like, they view it as a moral good for them to be anti-Semitic. And that, I think, really pushed me into this, like, oh, this is, so much of it is a spiritual battle of people being spiritually blind, of being unable and in some cases unwilling to see the difference between good and evil. And we're told in scripture that people will trade evil for good and good for evil, and we're told to expect that the righteous will be persecuted and that those who stand up for the right thing will face persecution. And I can say confidently that I grew up in the South as a conservative white Christian woman. Like, I make up the majority in my area geographically. So I never experienced, what it's like to be quote unquote persecuted, until I started speaking up on this issue. And then it was like, all bets are off. Like, people really, like, there are people who truly want me dead and who are actively trying to find my address online. Like, that is just the reality of like the situation that we're in. And I don't think you can step into this world and understand that without also realizing that, like, this is what it means to view this as a spiritual battle. And as much as that is also difficult, and it is also really increased my the amount of time I'm praying a day, which so that's good. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's for sure a spiritual issue.
Yeah, I wanted to end on a story, a personal story. In other episodes, I've talked about how I used to hate Israel, and in one of these special episodes, I talked about how that also led to me starting to harbor anti-Semitic views, and I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that I had adopted anti-Semitic views, and but part of this also, I went down this road. I want to admit publicly that I had walked down the road of Holocaust denial for a time, and it all started with a YouTube video. I watched a YouTube video of a Mexican guy talking about the Rothschilds and how
Mhm.
the Rothschilds, this Jewish family that throughout many centuries has come to be very successful and have a lot of influence, and they get blamed. They're part of conspiracy theories that blame them for a lot of things that they're not responsible for. And I started falling down the path of Holocaust denial. When I went to Israel, it was the first time that I went to a Holocaust museum, and it really convicted me and it changed my heart. When I came back, I started working for a Stand With Us, which is a pro-Israel organization in Chicago. And the person who was my boss, her name is Peggy. She's well known in Chicago because she worked a lot with Eli Wiesel. Wiesel?
Mhm. Yeah,
How do you say that?
yeah. I think it's Weisel.
Weisel. So here's the story I wanted to tell. She invited me for Thanksgiving. It was I got there in the summer after college. Thanksgiving came. I didn't have anybody to spend Thanksgiving with, so she invited me, and she invited me to her mom to see her mom. And throughout the conversation, it came out that her mom had survived the Holocaust, and this lady was full of life. She was so beautiful. The way that she survived the Holocaust is that her whole family died, and then she was a little girl. She survived, and when she was not a little girl, sorry, she was a teenager.
Mhm.
Somehow she survived, and she was put in one of these DP camps, displaced people's camps, and there she met who will become her husband. She was like 17, 18. Her husband was the same age. They got married, and Peggy, my boss, was born in the displaced people's camp. She was born there,
Wow.
and she told me the whole story how her later in life, so she grew up, she came back, she came to America. Later they went back to Poland, to the places where she had grown up, and had seen the property of her family that was taken by other people, by Polish people. And I'm telling this whole story. I hugged her. I told her, I'm so sorry that I didn't believe that what happened to you was not real. So we cried, we hugged. She was such a sweet person. And unfortunately, she passed away recently, but she lived a full life. She was awesome. And she told me about this, and this is what I wanted to tell everybody. The lesson that I learned from her is that the biggest lesson from the Holocaust is not tolerance. You will see, you go to museums sometimes, and it's like, be more tolerant. Don't hate people. Be more tolerant. But and I've learned this from my hero Retif Kaur as well, that the problem with the Holocaust was apathy. A lot of
Mhm.
people could have done a lot of things to stop the Holocaust. A lot of neighbors saw their Jewish people, their Jewish friends, their Jewish neighbors being taken away, and they didn't do enough to stop them. So the problem, one of the problems, and I'm submit to you, the biggest problem is apathy. So we need
Yeah.
to not be apathetic. Her family's property was taken away by her neighbors. Her family completely killed in the Holocaust. She is the only survivor, and it was
Mhm.
because people are apathetic. It's not me, so I'm not even gonna risk my life. And I get it. Sometimes it's difficult. So I want to invite everybody, go meet a survivor. There are
Mhm.
fewer and fewer of them out there. There's still a few alive. Go to the local museums. They sometimes have times where you can go meet a survivor. You can go to the house. You can chat with them in some services. So go meet a survivor and learn from them, so you can be a witness to what happened, so that you can tell other people to not be apathetic. And
Mhm.
one last thought that I have is that the Nazis had to build an entire machinery in able to exterminate 6 million Jews. Today, a country like Iran only needs one bomb. That's
Yep.
all they need to eliminate 10 million Jews from the face of
Mhm.
the earth if they wanted to. So we need to be very worried about. That's what keeps me up at night. But I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you, I told you at the beginning, I asked you what keeps you up at night. Now I want to
Mhm.
close the podcast asking you, what gives you hope? What are you optimistic about regarding these issues?
Yeah. Couple things. One, I'll say that I think that Christians are starting to wake up and care more. I'll say after the attack in DC, I got messages from multiple Christians, some who I know personally and some who just happen to follow me, who were like, hey, I really need to know more.
Mm,
Like, I really want to keep learning. And that made me really hopeful because I think that's the first time that I've had non-Jews, especially Christians, reach out and really like be curious about these issues. And I think that, it's unfortunate in some circumstances that the reason why we're reaching this point where Christians are starting to wake up is because they see it inching closer and closer to harming them rather than just the Jewish community. But I think that it is an overall net positive that Christians are starting to really like wake up to these issues. And I hope that it continues to be that way. Another thing that keeps me positive is the Jewish community just generally. And I'm sure you'll relate to this as well. Like these types of things like genuinely do keep me up at night. Like it's not, this is something that I do, like professionally, like the Israel education and all of this stuff is my job full time, but it is something that I care about deeply on a personal level. And so it's something that really like I get angry about it. I get frustrated. Sometimes I have to put my phone up because I know that I'm gonna like say something that I'll regret. Like I'm just another human being that, deeply cares about this issue. And I think that something that's really kept me positive is, this is new for me. Like I've only really been in this space for about 4 years now. And the Jewish community has been facing anti Semitism for thousands. So, anytime I go to a Shabbat dinner or a Chabad event or, really spend any time in Israel at all or around any of my Jewish friends, you can't help but walk away with like a sense of resilience and a sense of, um, the traditional saying, every Jewish holiday, as they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat, like that kind of thinking of like, yes, this sucks and it's an awful situation, but at the end of the day, like we will survive because this is how we've always done it. I think having people around me with that mentality has really given me hope and helped sustain me. And just knowing and understanding that God is faithful to his people, and that just because we can't see 2 feet in front of us doesn't mean that he can't, and that he's always going before us and making sure that everything is according to his plan. And so even when I very much don't understand it and often feel like a kid kicking the back of a driver's seat asking like, are we there yet, a million times, resting in God's faithfulness is a daily thing that I've really had to lean into, and I'm thankful for that and hopeful about that.
Thank you so much, Liv. Thank you for that. And yeah, friends, please try to learn more, educate yourself, and show your Jewish people around you that you care, that you think about them, pray for them. Try to do acts of kindness for them. Like when tragedies happened, like last weekend, that this group of Jewish people were set on fire by a terrorist. Um, we are going to send flowers to a few community members there this week as well, just to say, I'm sorry, we're thinking about you. We're so sorry. So please do that, friends, and continue to learn more. So, Liv, thank you so much for being with us. Any last thoughts before we go?
I'd just say if you're a Christian and you're watching this and you haven't, spoken up yet, I mean, whether or not that's like posting on social media or reaching out to your local Jewish community, just don't underestimate the power of your individual voice. I know it may not seem like much. I know that it may seem like the cost outweighs the benefit, but I promise you it's worth it. And yeah, don't underestimate the power that you have as an individual. That's what I'd
That's a
say.
great one. So, do you think about who's your Israel hero, your Zionist hero?
I did. Okay. He's a poet, Yehuda
Oh,
Amichai.
yeah.
He is, I have like multiple books of his poetry on my shelf, and there are not many. Also, the letters of Yoni Netanyahu,
Hmm.
um, also really amazing. I think I just really like anything that makes me feel like homesick for Israel, that makes me feel that kind of emotion, I really resonate with. And both of them are obviously very Zionistic and love Israel. So I consume all of their stuff regularly.
And you can read it in English, Yehuda Amichai?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Yeah, you can read that in English as well. Yeah, I don't know how many like books you could find, but if you Google him, you'll find a lot of his poetry online.
Yeah, well, friends, look him up. He's from Germany. He was born in Germany, then he moved to Israel, and also a great story. So that's a great one. Your hero. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for being with us this first time. Can't wait to do this again. Thank you for learning about the Holocaust and teaching it to us and people. Thank you for watching. Share, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Passages Pulse. Help us grow this community by liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you liked this week's episode, let us know by leaving a comment below. This podcast is a project of Passages Israel. We exist to educate the next generation of Christians on modern Israel, deepen the roots of their faith, and equip leaders to foster positive Christian engagement with Israel and the Jewish people. To learn more about Passages, follow us on social media or visit us at passagesisrael.org. Until next time, we'll keep our finger on the pulse.